January 26, 1945. The battlefield is a frozen hell outside Holtzwihr, France. Through the smoke and chaos, something that defies all military logic is happening. Atop a burning M10 tank destroyer, a vehicle that could explode at any second, a single American soldier is holding his ground, and he is systematically destroying an entire German company's advance all by himself. His opponents are not conscripts. They are 250 elite German mountain infantry, veterans transferred specifically for this offensive, supported by a wall of steel, 6 Panzer tanks and tank destroyers that had crushed resistance across Europe. The defender, in stark contrast, appears to be a boy who couldn't weigh more than 50 kilograms. The mathematics are an insult to the laws of war. By every principle of military science, the American position should have been overrun in minutes. Instead, for one impossible hour, a 19-year-old second lieutenant named Audie Leon Murphy would rewrite the rules of warfare. This is the story of how the path to that burning tank destroyer didn't begin in a military academy. It began in the cotton fields of Hunt County, Texas, where Audie Murphy was born in 1925 to impoverished sharecroppers. His childhood was defined not by games, but by crushing poverty and immense responsibility. After his father abandoned the family, his mother died in 1941, leaving a 16-year-old Audie as the sole provider for his younger siblings. In this harsh reality, marksmanship wasn't a sport, it was survival. The family's dinner depended entirely on what he could kill. Every bullet cost money they didn't have, and every miss meant empty stomachs. Under this pressure, he developed a supernatural skill. When a neighbor asked how he became such an uncanny shot, Murphy's answer was chillingly simple. "If I don't hit what I shoot at, my family doesn't eat tonight." It was this brutal education, where the penalty for failure was starvation, that forged a shooter's eye and a cold resolve that would one day terrify the most elite soldiers of the German army. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, Murphy saw a path out of poverty. The military offered steady pay, 3 meals a day, and a way to send money home to his siblings. But the boy who could outshoot any man in his county first had to overcome a different battle: the recruitment office. Standing just 5 feet 5 inches and weighing a mere 110 pounds, he was a ghost of a man. The Marines and the Navy both rejected him as too small. Even the elite Army paratroopers wouldn't take him. To the military bureaucracy, the boy who would become America's greatest war hero didn't even meet the minimum requirements to fight. It was only after his older sister provided a falsified affidavit claiming he was 18 that the regular Army infantry finally accepted him on June 30, 1942. They thought they were taking on an underweight kid. They had no idea they had just recruited a legend. In basic training, drill sergeants had mocked the 14-year-old looking recruit, calling him baby. But on the rifle range, they saw something else. His eyes would go cold as winter, and he never missed a single shot. In the mountains of Sicily during the Allied invasion in July 1943, Audie Murphy discovered what that coldness truly meant, a fact that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He was exceptionally good at killing. His childhood of hunting rabbits to survive had been the perfect, brutal training ground. While other soldiers were learning battlefield tactics, Murphy was simply applying the lessons of the Texas wilderness: how to move silently, how to use terrain for concealment, and how to shoot with lethal speed and accuracy. His skills were not learned, they were instinct. This became terrifyingly clear near Palermo. When his unit was pinned down by a German machine gun crew, Private Murphy didn't wait for orders. He single-handedly flanked the enemy position, eliminated the crew with grenades, and then turned their own devastating weapon against the retreating forces. His captain, recommending him for a Bronze Star, wrote that Murphy displayed a natural aptitude for combat that is extraordinary. But Sicily was just the beginning. The crucible of the Italian campaign would transform him from a gifted soldier into a legend. If Sicily revealed his talent, the brutal Italian campaign honed it into a terrifying weapon. At the Volturno River crossing in October 1943, Murphy's squad was decimated during a German counterattack. Alone and under heavy fire, he held his position single-handedly, using a borrowed sniper rifle to kill 5 enemy soldiers at ranges exceeding 300 yards. For this action, he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second-highest medal for valor. But what was it like to fight alongside him? His fellow soldiers described a man who had become something other than human in the heat of battle. Staff Sergeant William Polson recalled, "Muff didn't fight angry. That's what was terrifying about him. He fought cold, calculated, like he was doing arithmetic. See a German, eliminate the German, move to the next German. No emotion, no hesitation, just deadly efficiency. This cold arithmetic of war was on full display at the blood-soaked Anzio beachhead, where he earned his first Silver Star for stalking and destroying a German tank with a bazooka at point-blank range. By the time he left Italy, Murphy had survived some of the war's most savage fighting. He was no longer just a talented soldier. He was a living legend, feared by the very men who had conquered a continent. By January 1945, Murphy and his unit, Company B, had reached the Colmar Pocket, the last piece of French soil the Wehrmacht controlled. Hitler had ordered it held at all costs, reinforcing it with his best units, including the 2nd Mountain Division, elite soldiers specially trained for winter combat. Against this force, Company B was a ghost. In just 5 days of brutal fighting, they had lost 102 men. From a full strength of nearly 200, they were down to just 40 exhausted, frostbitten soldiers. All of their officers, except Murphy, had been killed or evacuated, and Murphy himself was secretly fighting with a fresh shrapnel wound. As one private recalled, "We were finished, done. We knew we were sitting ducks." They weren't a line of defense, they were a tripwire, waiting for the inevitable German onslaught. January 26, 1945, dawned gray and bitter cold. At 1 p.m., the German attack began not with soldiers, but with a terrifying artillery barrage. For 30 agonizing minutes, shells exploded in the treetops, showering Company B's positions with a steel rain of deadly fragments. Then, at 2 p.m., the shelling stopped, and the main assault materialized. One soldier described the horrifying sight: 6 German tanks spread out in attack formation, and behind them, what looked like an army of ghosts. There were 250 elite infantry, all clad in white snow camouflage, advancing silently across the field. Murphy's only hope against the tanks were 2 M10 tank destroyers, but the defense crumbled almost instantly. The exhausted, freezing crews missed their first shots. The German return fire was devastating. A direct hit from an 88mm shell engulfed the rear M10 in flames, its crews scrambling for the woods. The second M10, trying to maneuver, slid into a ditch and was abandoned. Within minutes, Company B's only defense against 6 German tanks was gone. The ghosts were closing in, and now, nothing stood in their way. By 2:20 p.m., the German infantry were closing to within 200 yards. With both M10 tank destroyers now out of action, Company B was defenseless and the line was about to shatter. In that moment of impending annihilation, Second Lieutenant Murphy made the decision that would define his life and earn him the Medal of Honor. He gave a command that was both tactical and selfless. He ordered his remaining men to fall back to prepared positions deeper in the woods, pulling them out of the kill zone. But as his men retreated to safety, Murphy himself did not retreat.
Instead, he did something that defied all logic and instinct for survival. He turned and ran directly into the storm of artillery and machine gun fire, not away from the danger, but towards it, sprinting for the M10 tank destroyer that was still burning on the battlefield. His men were falling back, but their commander was advancing alone. The M10 tank destroyer wasn't a fortress, it was a ticking bomb. The rear of the vehicle was fully engulfed in flames, ignited by the German 88mm shell that had struck its fuel and ammunition. Black smoke poured from the hull, and the heat was so intense it could be felt from 30 feet away. Inside its steel shell were 51 rounds of 3-inch high explosive ammunition and over 300 gallons of gasoline. At any moment, the heat could cook off the remaining shells, turning the entire vehicle into a massive bomb that would vaporize anything within a 50-meter radius. And this is where Audie Murphy chose to make his stand. He climbed onto the burning vehicle and manned its .50 caliber M2 Browning machine gun. From this elevated, fiery throne, he had a clear field of fire on the advancing Germans. But he was also completely exposed, a single, silhouetted figure against the sky, with no cover except the choking smoke rising from the inferno beneath him. From the woodline, his men watched in stunned disbelief. Private Anthony Abramsky later testified, "I saw Lieutenant Murphy climb on top of the burning tank destroyer. It was the greatest display of guts and courage I have ever seen." He now stood alone, a solitary target on a throne of fire, ready to take on an army. The .50 caliber M2 Browning was a devastating weapon. It fired 550 rounds per minute, and its half-inch bullets could tear a human body apart. In the hands of Audie Murphy, it became an instrument of precise, methodical destruction. For the next hour, he fought with extraordinary effectiveness. But he wasn't just firing the machine gun, he was conducting a symphony of death. Throughout the entire engagement, he clutched a field telephone, maintaining constant contact with supporting artillery batteries. With one hand, he was cutting down German soldiers with direct fire. With the other, he was calling in artillery missions dangerously close to his own position. The combination of his machine gun and the perfectly placed artillery created a wall of steel that the German infantry could not penetrate. Sergeant Elma Broly, watching from the woods, said, "The German infantrymen got within 10 yards of Lieutenant Murphy, who killed them in the drawers, in the meadows, in the woods, wherever he saw them." From the battalion command post, an officer observed through binoculars, testifying, "He wasn't just spraying bullets. Every burst was aimed. He was picking off German infantry like he was at a shooting gallery."
The shells landed within 50 yards, and the explosions tore apart the German soldiers caught in the open. But Murphy, exposed on the vehicle, was also in the impact zone. Shrapnel tore through his leg, but he kept firing, his final defiant shots combining with the artillery he had called upon himself to finally break the German attack for good. His final, desperate act had broken the assault. The surviving German infantry, their officers unable to rally them for another attack, began falling back in disarray. The tanks, now without their infantry support, reversed course and withdrew. After an hour of continuous combat, Murphy finally climbed down from the M10, his uniform scorched and his leg bleeding from fresh shrapnel wounds. 10 minutes later, the vehicle he had stood on finally exploded. The battlefield before him was a devastating sight, with the bodies of an estimated 50 German soldiers scattered across the snow. But as Murphy walked back to his men, they saw something more terrifying than the battle itself. According to Private Abrams' guy, he was calm, scary calm. He made sure everyone was okay, then sat down and lit a cigarette. Like nothing had happened, Abrams' guy noted. His hands weren't even shaking. The battle was over, but the war inside the man who had just won it single-handedly was far from finished. Perhaps the most powerful proof of what Murphy accomplished comes not from American records, but from the striking silence in the German ones. Despite extensive historical research, there is a near-complete absence of German first-hand accounts of the battle. No diary entries, no soldier quotes, no POW testimonies have ever surfaced that describe being stopped by a single American soldier. This silence is explained by the sheer shock and humiliation of the defeat. The official war diary of the elite 2nd Mountain Division contains only a single, terse entry. Attack, repulsed with heavy casualties. Enemy resistance heavier than expected. That understated line hides a devastating truth. That night these elite troops, who had never retreated in 4 years of war, withdrew from the entire sector, without orders from their commanding general. The psychological impact of being stopped by one man was more devastating than the physical casualties. Their silence in the history books speaks louder than any battlefield report. They had met something their doctrine couldn't explain and their warrior pride could never admit. While the world celebrated Audie Murphy as America's most decorated soldier, the young Texan was fighting a different war, one against the demons that followed him home. He suffered from what was then called battle fatigue, now recognized as severe post-traumatic stress disorder. The man who had shown no fear atop a burning tank destroyer was terrified of the darkness in his own mind. He was plagued by chronic insomnia and recurring nightmares that threw him back into the chaos of battle. His hypervigilance was so extreme that he slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow. Eventually, he couldn't even sleep in his own house, moving to his garage and leaving the lights on all night because the darkness reminded him of night combat. "A demon seemed to have entered my body," Murphy later wrote. His first wife, Wanda Hendricks, described him as two different people. The charming public hero by day, and a man who patrolled his own house with a loaded gun at night. He had survived the German army, but he now faced a relentless, invisible enemy that gave him no peace. But Audie Murphy's final and perhaps greatest battle was not fought for territory, but for the minds of the soldiers who came after him. In an era when combat stress was seen as a sign of weakness or cowardice, America's most decorated hero became a pioneering advocate for veterans' mental health, speaking openly about his own invisible wounds. He was decades ahead of his time. "I can't remember when I didn't have nightmares," he wrote in 1966. "They became part of my life, like breathing. But I was lucky. I could afford doctors. What about the veteran who can't? What about the thousands coming back from Vietnam with the same problems?" This act of turning his private pain into a public purpose created lasting change. His advocacy helped establish combat stress as a legitimate medical condition and encouraged thousands of veterans to seek help they otherwise would have been too ashamed to request. The boy who fought to save his friends in the woods of France became the man who fought to save a generation of veterans from the silent war that follows them home. In the end, that is why the Germans were so profoundly shocked. They had encountered something that military science couldn't explain and that overwhelming force could not overcome: the unconquerable human spirit. Heroism isn't about being fearless. It's about acting despite fear when others depend on you. When asked why he did it, Murphy's answer was always the same: they were killing my friends. That simple, powerful motivation is his ultimate legacy. It's the story of how the boy who hunted rabbits to feed his family became the man who stopped an army to save his friends. His stand at Holtzwihr remains eternal testimony that one person, at the right place and the right time, with the right motivation, can change everything.